Welcome back to our course on the book of Revelation. This is session 17 on Revelation chapter 14. The Angels and Companions. Well, the chapter opens with these words. Then I looked, and lo, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the sound of many waters, like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpers playing on their harps, and they sang a new song before the throne. So, Revelation will alternate back and forth between a vision of the throne and what God is doing, and then a vision of what is taking place on earth. And I think in the context of the narrative, it is to encourage those who are reading that these things that are happening on the earth, even if they're difficult and terrible, will not be the end of all things. So we see the Lamb standing on Mount Zion. The Lamb was last seen opening the scroll before God's throne in chapter 5 and 6, and again in chapter 8. The apparent triumph of the beast is contrasted here with the calm power of the Lamb, who is unaffected by the beast's rebellion. Well, as we think about Mount Zion here, there's several possibilities, but one is that this is simply a metaphor, or that this is a spiritual idea. So, for example, in the book of Hebrews, referring to Christians, the writer to the Hebrews says, "No, you have approached Mount Zion and the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and countless angels in festal gathering, and the assembly of the firstborn enrolled in heaven, and God the judge of all, and the spirits of the just made perfect, and Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant." So the writer to the Hebrews uses these same kind of images, but is talking about our present experience of the heavenly through our salvation. So one possibility is that these words should be regarded as something spiritual. So it's certainly possible to see this as a heavenly vision, but the phrase, the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, would seem to echo Jewish traditions about the descent of the Messiah to rule from an earthly Zion. These would be modeled on certain Old Testament texts, Isaiah chapter 40 and Psalm 2, and certainly later Jewish apocalyptic texts, which saw Mount Zion as the literal place where the Messiah would defeat his foes and judge them. So they actually pictured the Messiah coming down from heaven and physically reigning on Mount Zion. Now, this list of people, this 144,000, is made reference to. So what do we make of this? Is this a small final remnant of Christians, or does it represent all Christians? And it might be interesting to ask whether John considers himself among the 144,000. If we look back at verse 3, it seems like he's hearing a song which he is not able to sing himself. So if he was among the 144,000, would he not be on the inside of that? Instead, the words, the understanding of this song remain a kind of prophetic mystery to him. So the mention of the 144,000, of course, brings about an echo of Revelation 7, where earlier we heard of 144,000, those sealed with a mark on their forehead. But we were told that this was people from every tribe of Israel. And it mentions all the names of the tribes. And when we talked about this before, I mentioned that most of those tribes no longer exist because after the destruction of the north of Israel, those tribes were never restored. If there is a connection here, we now have a more specific meaning to the mark or seal in Revelation 7. Specifically, it is the names of God and Jesus written on their foreheads. Since the metaphor in Revelation 7 appears to mean all the redeemed, we're going to be puzzled by what we hear next in Revelation 14. Okay, so when the text goes on to describe the 144,000 who had the name of the Father and Jesus written on their foreheads, it says that they were ones who had not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins, ransomed as the first fruits, and on their lips no deceit. They are unblemished, which goes along with the idea of them being the first fruits sacrifice. So, where we might have wanted to connect this to the earlier reference to the 144,000, it seemed like that was a reference to the entire church. And now there are some very specific and narrow characteristics given to this. He describes them as males who are virgins, who are the first fruits. So if the image represents the whole church, we don't want to imply that heaven would be limited to undefiled male celibate virgin. Another idea would be, if we take Mount Zion in a literal earthly sense, the natural answer would be that the 144,000 are actually a military force awaiting the final battle. This explains their maleness, since in the ancient world, soldiers would always only be male. The symbolism of their sexual purity could echo the Deuteronomic regulations for holy war, found in Deuteronomy 20, but the parallel's not very exact, because actually virgins were not supposed to be among the soldiers. They were supposed to allow the soldiers to begin a family before they would participate. So it could be that this is some kind of military metaphor, that this is about a heavenly war that's about to take place, but it's not a perfect fit for these regulations from Deuteronomy. If, on the other hand, we take Zion as a heavenly place, then the parallel to Revelation 7 and a parallel later in 15 would suggest these are martyrs who have lost their life because they followed Jesus even unto death. This is actually a better fit for the idea of them being a first fruit sacrifice, which is also mentioned. Now, we're not really forced into a dilemma. One major commentator has suggested that the scene is both highly symbolic and placed on earth. So we have this idea in the modern world that there can only be one interpretation, only one meaning. In the ancient world, they were quite comfortable with layers of meaning, a spiritual meaning, a literal meaning, a number of spiritual meanings. So perhaps it was intended to have both of these ideas built into it. The word virgin or parthenoi would be an unusual word to use of soldiers. The masculine use is rare in ancient Greek, but it's not unheard of in the first century. And clearly this could be a reference to an aspect of the ascetical discipleship of Jesus. So in Luke's gospel, Peter says to Jesus, "We have given up our possessions and followed you." Jesus replies, "Amen, I say to you, there is no one who has given up house or wife or brother or parents or children for the sake of the kingdom," Jesus continues, "who will not be rewarded." But in Luke, there are parallel passages in Mark and Matthew. He adds this word wife, giving up a wife. And in Matthew's gospel, when Jesus is asked a question about this, he says, "Some are incapable of marriage because they were born so, some because they were made so by others, such as the eunuch, and some because they have renounced marriage for the sake of the kingdom. Whoever can accept it should accept it." So clearly in the discipleship of Jesus, he's willing to embrace the idea that one could deliberately renounce marriage and be celibate for the sake of the kingdom. And Jesus himself modeled this. Then later, when we read in St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 7, he makes some similar comments. He does not impose this as a universal discipline. If he did, the church would be very small. There would be no children. But he says that if possible, this might be a better way, that it is something that you could be called to. You may have a calling to marriage, or you may have a calling to the celibate life. Well, our narrative shifts, and after that heavenly scene, we see some angels that appear, and they're going to bring a judgment. They appear to make a universal proclamation of the good news. The judgment will follow. This is done as a final warning before the judgment, which will follow in the next chapter. So the emperor's city is called Babylon, and it is said that Babylon has made the nations drink her licentious passion. So there's a metaphor used here of a woman who is giving herself in some sexual way in passion and causing others to engage in immorality with her. The work of the beast in the previous chapter was carried out by human agents. So if we interpreted correctly, it would be the emperors, the agents of the empire, officials of the imperial cult, and false teachers. And now the testimony of the three angels likely represents the testimony of the church, which counters this false testimony. The first angel is flying in mid-heaven and proclaims the eternal gospel to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. So the idea is that this is a universal proclamation. Nobody can miss this. It's not hidden. He's flying in mid-heaven. And the gospel message is fear God and give him glory and worship him. So in terms of the traditional idea of the message of the gospel, this does sound a little unusual, but the fear of God was a sense of reverence towards him, a regard towards him of respect and honor and love. And in the midst of this controversy, people are being called to choose between the evil of the beast and the gospel and God. And this is most clearly represented by how they worship. The second angel echoes the judgment of Isaiah 29:9 and prophesies the judgment on the city of Babylon. Fallen is Babylon the Great, and this will be the theme of the later chapters of Revelation 17 and 18. Babylon here is a type of Rome. So because of persecution, they did not want to write something that could be interpreted as being directly against the Roman government, or this could cause a greater persecution. So they used kind of a code. Babylon is seen as a code or a cipher for Rome that the early Christians would have understood. We see this exactly in Peter's letter, 1 Peter 5:3. He greets the readers from Babylon, which the early church widely took as a code for Rome. This is a counterpoint to the worship of the beast. The emperor city Babylon had made the nations drink her licentious passion. The judgment on Rome is described as the wine of God's fury, poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. And of course, we will have 7 cups of wrath coming in the next chapter. Those who compromise with the emperor will suffer torment with burning sulfur. Just again, a little archaeological item to highlight what happened in the ancient world. This is actually a pendant which depicts Alexander the Great. Alexander is actually a Greek, and he conquered the entire known world before the Roman Empire. But people would wear this pendant of Alexander the Great depicted as if he's Zeus, and it would be a kind of magical charm. So they would wear it as a talisman against evil, and this was occurring in the Roman world. So just to show you how people began to worship the emperors or people like Alexander the Great as if they were a god. Concluding this little segment, we have an appearance of the Son of Man, and he comes to redeem those. He appears now as with a golden crown as the final judge, and the description of him, one like the son of, one like a son of man sitting on the cloud, is a clear allusion to Daniel 7. So there was this apocalyptic image of a being in heaven who is the Son of Man, has an article. And Jesus interprets himself in those terms. The term Son of Man was a very generic term. It didn't really mean anything. The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Nobody would have thought, oh, he's referring to Daniel 7. But as soon as Jesus says the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, sitting on the clouds, it becomes a clear allusion not to any Son of Man, but the Son of Man from Daniel 7. And when the ancient Jews heard this, they accused Jesus of blasphemy, of claiming to be God. So Jesus is coming as God and the final judge. And this was a tradition found in the Gospels with Jesus making a claim to divinity through this term. Then it talks about a harvest that would take place. The Son of Man has a sickle for harvest, and he's joined by angels from the temple and the altar in heaven to harvest the earth like grapes to be thrown into the great winepress of God's fury. So some, of course, are harvested for life and some for judgment.